The organ's thunderous notes rolled through St. Michael's Cathedral, vibrating in my bones as I stood at the altar. My palms pressed into the smooth silk of my wedding dress, damp with nerves I could no longer disguise. 200 eyes fixed. On me, rows of friends, family, and colleagues, all waiting for the moment I became Mrs. Nathaniel Reed. The sunlight poured through the stained glass, scattering fragments of color across the marble aisle like shards of a broken promise. To them, I was a glowing bride. To me, I was standing on the edge of a cliff, every heartbeat hammering with a truth that could shatter everything. Beyond the crowd, my mother sat in the front pew, her emerald dress flawless, her smile radiant. The portrait of maternal pride. A day ago, I would have trusted that smile. A day ago, I believed mothers shielded their daughters and love was sacred. Now I knew better. Nathaniel squeezed my hand, his blue eyes holding the warmth I once thought was devotion. "You ready for this, Celeste?" he whispered, his confidence the same charm that had drawn me to him 3 years earlier. I studied. The face I had memorized, the jawline I once traced with my fingertips, the mouth that had promised forever and felt clarity cut through me like glass. "Oh, I'm ready," I whispered back, my voice steady though inside I was unraveling. More ready than he could ever imagine. 3 months earlier, my life had looked perfect. I was 28 with a degree from Georgetown, a senior editor at a respected publishing house, engaged to the golden boy of our community, Nathaniel Reed, the dashing 31-year-old son of a judge and a philanthropist, a corporate attorney with a BMW, and a last name that opened doors. He had proposed to me at the Kennedy Center during Swan Lake, my favorite ballet. That night, my mother had clutched my hand, gushing over the diamond on my finger, praising not my happiness, but the family I was marrying into. My father, a pastor, blessed the match with quiet pride, believing he saw in Nathaniel a man who adored his only daughter. I should have heard the dissonance in their voices. The wedding consumed us. My mother orchestrated every detail with military precision, roses instead of wildflowers, a full orchestra instead of a quartet, traditional vows instead of my own words. "Mother knows best," she would beam, her smile a mirror of my own. Nathaniel seemed to revel in it. He charmed my parents, shared late-night conversations in the kitchen with my mother, their laughter drifting through the house while I worked in the next room. He praised her constantly, her food, her elegance, her devotion. I had brushed it off as politeness. I told myself it was nothing. Love, I was learning, can blind you until you can't see what's right in front of you. The first crack appeared 3 weeks before the wedding. I arrived at my parents' house, arms full of RSVP cards, to find my mother flushed and breathless at the sink. Her hair was undone, her voice a touch too high. A coffee mug from our bust china set, still warm, sat on the counter. She lied easily, saying it was hers, that she needed caffeine. I almost believed her, almost. Later, I noticed how her body eased when Nathaniel texted that he'd be working late. The second crack came a week later. Nathaniel had grown distant, missing dinners, skipping the cake tasting, brushing me off with vague excuses. When I went to his apartment, his car was parked downstairs, but his voice came muffled from behind a locked bedroom door. A locked door. A lipstick-stained wine glass sat in the living room. He claimed food poisoning, begged me to leave. His words of love came too slowly, like a line rehearsed. I told myself to trust him. I told myself not to imagine what or who was behind. That door dot, but truth doesn't stay buried. It seeps through the cracks like water through stone. 2 days before the wedding, it broke open. My mother called, asking me to pick up an envelope from her car. Simple, harmless, until I saw a small black notebook wedged between the seats. My name was scrawled across the cover in her handwriting. I should have left it there, but my fingers trembled as I opened it. The first entry was dated 3 months ago, the day after my engagement. Nathaniel Reed is everything I should have married. Handsome, successful, from the right family, but maybe it's not too late. Maybe I deserve something beautiful for once. The notebook slipped from my hands. The world tilted, entry after entry, her words carved into me like a knife. He looks at me the way William used to before routine wore him down. He stayed after Celeste left for work. We talked for hours. He said I was wasted on small-town life. He kissed me today. God help me doubt my mother, my fiance, every laugh they'd shared in the kitchen, every late-night smile, every evasive answer, it all clicked into place. And in that moment, sitting in her car with her confession burning in my hands, I understood the crushing truth. My wedding wasn't the beginning of a beautiful life. It was the final act of a carefully constructed lie. I kissed him back. I let him into places of myself I'd thought had gone dormant years ago. In his apartment, with the city lights pouring in through the tall glass windows, we crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. While Celeste sat at her book club, her fiancé and her mother made love. He told me I was more alive than any woman he had ever known. That I was fire, hunger, vitality. And for the first time in decades, I believed. I could still burn. He whispered that after the wedding, we would find a way. That marrying Celeste was what his parents, his community, his image demanded, but his heart belonged to me. The final entry in her journal was written just yesterday. Tomorrow night, the night before the wedding, he'll come over while William is at his bachelor party meeting. It will be our last night before Celeste becomes his wife. After that, we'll be more careful. But we've come too far to stop now. I sat frozen, the little black book trembling in my hands. Outside, life carried on as if nothing had changed. Children rode bicycles down quiet suburban streets. Sprinklers clicked across manicured lawns. Dogs barked at passing mail carriers. A postcard-perfect neighborhood. And yet, my world had caved in. How long? The question seared me. How long had they been laughing at me across dinner tables, sharing glances during family holidays while I, blind and trusting, thought I was loved? How many conversations had I walked in on just too late? How many silences had been filled with something I couldn't hear? I thought of my father, his joy at preparing to walk me down the aisle tomorrow, blissfully unaware that the bridegroom was sharing his wife's bed. The cruelty of it hollowed me out. At first, the tears came slow. Then they tore through me, hot and relentless, streaking mascara down my face, choking my chest until I thought I'd suffocate. They weren't just tears of grief, they were acid. Tears of betrayal, corroding every memory of trust I'd ever had in them. When they finally stopped, what remained wasn't sorrow. It was ice, a clarity that felt almost holy in its sharpness. They had chosen each other. Now I would choose myself. I didn't go home that night. Instead, I walked into the grand lobby of the Willard Intercontinental and paid in cash under a false name, spinning a story for the desk clerk about surprising my husband for our anniversary. The lie slid from my tongue as easily as breath. Maybe betrayal had taught me how to lie. In my room, I laid everything out on the bed like evidence for a jury. Her journal, Nathaniel's credit card statements, the photographs of receipts, the list of excuses I'd collected without realizing I was gathering ammunition. The smell of expensive cologne lingering in my parents' kitchen, the lipstick-stained glass in his apartment, his sudden knowledge of wines my mother adored. Every detail I had dismissed was suddenly damning. Ordered overpriced pasta from room service and sat cross-legged on the bed, the journal open in front of me, chewing methodically as I built a plan. The old Celeste would have confronted them. She would have screamed, begged for explanations, and maybe even forgiven. But that woman had died in a parked Mercedes with her mother's confession in her hands. The woman who took her place understood that forgiveness would only mean erasing herself, and she refused to be erased. This wasn't about private tears. This was about spectacle. They wanted to play games in secret. I would drag them into the light. I called my assistant at Meridian Publishing first. Jenna, I need the guest list for the wedding. Every name, every email, every phone number, every social handle. She hesitated, worried by my tone. Is everything okay? I smiled, though. She couldn't see it. Perfect. Everything is absolutely perfect. Next, I dialed Priya, my college roommate, now a journalist in New York. She squealed about the wedding, about excitement and nerves. I cut her off. I need you at St. Michael's tomorrow with your camera and press credentials. Something newsworthy will happen, and I want it documented. Her voice grew tight. Celeste, you're scaring me. My laugh was low, unfamiliar. I'm not the one who should be scared. The hardest call was the last one. My father's voice came warm, teasing. Sweetheart, shouldn't the father of the bride avoid talking to his daughter the night before the big day? Bad luck, isn't it? My throat tightened. Dad, I whispered, and for a second my armor cracked. I love you. No matter what happens tomorrow, remember that. Remember none of it is your fault. Silence on the line, then his worried voice. Celeste, what's going on? I forced steadiness into mine. Everything is finally going to be right. That night, sleep was impossible. I sat awake in the hotel's silence, staring at the city through the window, thinking about justice and revenge and the thin line. Between them, revenge hurts, justice exposes. Tomorrow, I would deliver justice out at dawn. Sunlight spilled across Washington in rose and gold. I sat in my robe with coffee, watching the city stir to life, my phone buzzing with syrupy messages. From my mother, good morning, beautiful bride. Today is perfect. The flowers are flawless. I can't wait to see you walk down the aisle. Each text was a blade disguised in silk. I showered, studied my face in the mirror, and for the first time in months, I didn't see the dutiful daughter or the naive bride. I saw something sharper, someone dangerous. Someone ready to St. Michael's. Cathedral glistened in the morning light, its spires piercing the sky. Guests were already arriving, laughter and chatter filling the courtyard. I parked at the side entrance and walked into the bridal room, where bridesmaids fluttered around with nervous joy. Kathleen embraced me, her voice bubbling. You're glowing. You're radiant. I smiled faintly. Today's going to change everything. She asked about my mother, surprised she wasn't there. I shrugged. She'd be here soon. You know how she likes perfection. What I didn't say was that I knew exactly where she had been last night. Nathaniel's phone tracker told me. Enough dot as my bridesmaids fastened the pearl buttons of the gown my mother had chosen. I felt each one snap into place like pieces of armor. The dress she'd insisted upon, the gown she wanted for her perfect photographs, would become the costume. Of her downfall dot at 11:30, the photographer began snapping pre-ceremony portraits. To him, they were images of bridal joy. To me, they were the last photos of a woman who had decided to set fire to the script she'd been forced into. 15 minutes later, my father appeared in the doorway, eyes misting at the sight of me in white. My beautiful girl, he whispered, his voice thick with pride. I crossed the room, placed my mother's journal in his hands, and met his gaze. Dad, I said quietly, I need you to read this before we walk down that aisle. He unfolded the journal with hesitant fingers, his brow furrowed in confusion. But as his eyes began to trace the words, I watched the blood drain from his face. His lips parted soundlessly, his hands trembling against the fragile paper. Celeste. His voice cracked, barely more than a whisper. No, this can't be. Your mother, she would never... Read the dates, Dad, I said softly. though the tightness in my chest made each word ache. Read everything. He sank heavily into the nearest chair, clutching the journal like it might burn him. Page after page revealed itself under. His shaking hands, years of sermons built on family and fidelity, undone in a matter of paragraphs. I knelt beside him, the fabric of my gown spilling across the floor like milk around a broken glass. How long have you known? His voice was hoarse, fragile. Since yesterday, I whispered. I'm so sorry, Dad. I didn't want you to find out this way. He lifted his eyes to mine, a man who had stood at pulpits thundering about the sanctity of vows, now broken by the very woman he trusted most. Something inside him cracked, and I saw it, the shattering of 30 years. What do we do now? His question hung in the room, desperate, searching. We walked down that aisle, I said, firm despite the tremor in my hands. We let the world see who Diana Darren and Nathaniel Reed really are. Celeste, no. His words trembled with fear. The scandal, the humiliation isn't ours, I cut in. It's theirs. For a long moment, he simply stared at me. I could almost see the weight of tradition pressing against his chest, decades of teaching that family failures must be buried behind closed doors. There are 200 people out there, he whispered. 200 who believe this is a sacred day. They deserve the truth, I said. My reputation will not be silence. It will be that I chose dignity over deceit. A knock jolted us both. 5 minutes, the coordinator called. Dad rose slowly, his legs unsteady. For a terrifying second, I thought he might collapse. But then he straightened, his shoulders squaring, his eyes heavy with pride. You're braver than I ever was, he murmured. I learned from you, I answered, sliding my hand into the crook of his arm. Together, we stepped toward the sanctuary doors. Through the glass, I could see them all, family, friends, a cathedral bursting with expectation. White roses lined the altar, their scent curling through the air. As the string quartet played Pachelbel's canon, Nathaniel stood tall in his perfect tuxedo, his smile polished, his blue eyes filled with a kind of affection that would fool anyone who hadn't read that journal. And there, in the front row, sat my mother, radiant in emerald, lace handkerchief poised delicately in her hand. She looked like the very picture of maternal pride. No one watching would ever believe the truth. The doors opened. Music swelled. My bridesmaids floated down the aisle, all soft pink and practiced smiles. Then the bridal march struck its familiar notes, and 200 people rose as one. Cameras flashed. Whispers of awe rippled through the crowd. Nathaniel's face lit up as though I were his world. My mother pressed the handkerchief to her eyes, her performance flawless. Broadway would have adored them. Too bad they had chosen my life for their stage. We reached the altar. My father placed my hand into Nathaniel's. That sacred gesture one man giving his daughter to another felt instead like being handed to my enemy, dearly beloved. Pastor Jenkins began, his voice solemn and rich. We are gathered here to witness the union of Nathaniel William Reed and Celeste Marion Darren in holy matrimony. I let him go on. My smile never faltered. My grip never loosened. I waited. Nathaniel squeezed my hand, and I squeezed back, almost daring him to feel the truth vibrating through me. My mother gazed on, beaming. She thought she'd won. If anyone has just cause why these two should not be joined, let them speak now or forever hold their peace. My heart thundered, but I stayed silent. Not yet. I wanted them to believe. I wanted the fall to be brutal. The vows unfolded, each word a knife pressed against my ribs. When Nathaniel declared, I do, forsaking all others, the audacity nearly made me laugh. Then it was my turn. Celeste, do you take Nathaniel? This was at the point of no return. My chance to either seal myself into their lie or ignite the match that would burn their world down. I looked at my father. Strength at my mother. Lies at Nathaniel. Betrayal wrapped in charm. Actually, I said, my voice clear as the cathedral. Bells, before I answer, I have something to say. The music died. The whispers stilled. The room froze. 200 faces fixed on me as Nathaniel's grip tightened, his smile breaking. "What are you doing?" he hissed. I pulled my hand free and stepped closer to the microphone. I just realized before I make the biggest promise of my life, I should be honest. Gasps rippled as my mother stiffened, her handkerchief slipping uselessly into her lap. "I want to thank you all for coming," I continued, steady, unshaken. "It means everything that you traveled to celebrate what you believed was my happily ever after. But happy endings can't be built on lies. And there's something you all need to know before this ceremony continues." Celeste and Nathaniel reached for me. I stepped back. "Yesterday, I discovered that my fiancé and my mother have been having an affair." The words detonated through the cathedral. Gasps, shouts, the scrape of pews. The sound of something breaking that would never mend. My father stood. His voice, heavy with decades of authority, silenced the room. "Sit down, Diana." And for the first time in her life, my mother obeyed. The cathedral seemed to tilt on its foundations as Nathaniel stood frozen, his carefully built world collapsing before every set of eyes. His lips parted, desperate for words that refused to. "Come, I can explain." "Oh, please," I answered, my voice cutting through the silence like shattered glass, laced with honey and venom. "Do explain. Tell your father. Tell your colleagues. Tell every single person who believed you were a man of honor how you seduced your fiancé's mother. Tell them how you planned to marry me while keeping your affair alive with her." The air thickened until breathing felt impossible. No defense came. No silver-tongued lawyer tricks, no polished smiles. Only silence. In the first row, my mother's sobs ripped through the stillness, not delicate tears, but raw, jagged cries of a woman exposed. "Celeste," she gasped, "please, you don't understand." "I understand perfectly," I said, pivoting toward her. My voice was steady, each word a blade. "You decided my happiness was worth sacrificing so you could feel wanted again. You looked at the man I was supposed to marry and convinced yourself you deserved him more than I did. That's not, I never meant, you never meant to get caught." The truth settled over her like smoke, searing and undeniable. She collapsed back into her seat, emerald gown shimmering with the hollow shine of desperation. I scanned the congregation family, lifelong friends, mentors all watching. Shock, sympathy, disgust flickered across their faces. But not pity. That mattered. I refused to be pitied. "This isn't about revenge," I said, my voice carrying through the vaulted ceiling. "It's about truth. About refusing to build a life on lies. About choosing myself when those closest to me chose each other over me." I began my walk down the aisle, my train trailing behind me like a coronation robe. Reaching the front row, I paused at my father's side. "I'm sorry. You had to hear it this way. But I'm not sorry, you know the truth." His eyes, wet with grief, burned with pride. "I love you, sweetheart. You did the right thing." I kissed his forehead, salt, sorrow, and strength, then continued forward. Chaos erupted behind me. Nathaniel stammered beneath his father's fury. Guests rose, whispering, pointing. My mother wept into her hands as Mrs. Chin stared at her with open disdain. But I never turned back. I pushed through the cathedral doors, my ivory gown billowing like a storm cloud in retreat. Outside, the October air was sharp and alive. The parking lot was my sanctuary. From inside came the muffled sound of chairs scraping, voices rising, lives splintering. My phone buzzed relentlessly. I ignored them all except one. Holy hell, Celeste. Priya's voice trembled through the line. Did you really? Did you get it all? Every second, she breathed. My editor's going to lose his mind. This footage. It'll be everywhere tonight. Good, I said. But are you okay? Really okay? I looked down at myself, still in my wedding dress, standing alone beside my car, having detonated 2 lives and scorched my own in the process. I smiled, the first genuine smile in months. I'm perfect. And I meant it. By nightfall, the video spread like wildfire. By morning, headlines. By afternoon, hashtags. Hashtag wedding revenge. Nathaniel's name was Ash. His father's law firm announced his indefinite leave. Translation: his career was finished. That evening, a courier delivered a handwritten letter from Victoria Reed. Apologies, admiration, respect. She promised her support, confessed her horror at her son's betrayal. For the first time, I felt pity not for Nathaniel, but for her. Meanwhile, my father became the pillar the community rallied around. Neighbors, church members, friends all came with casseroles, hugs, prayers. But my mother, her empire of appearances crumbled in a single weekend. The women she had clawed to impress turned their backs. Invitations vanished, phones fell silent. Within days, she resigned from boards, fled to her sister's house. The perfect pastor's wife reduced to a whisper of scandal. 3 days later, I found my father in his study, boxing 30 years of sermons. You don't have to resign, I pleaded again. Yes, I do, he answered, voice steady but tired. How can I preach fidelity when my own wife shattered it? The congregation deserves better. He looked older, worn, yet strangely lighter, like a man freed from a burden he hadn't realized he carried. What will you do? I asked. A small church in Vermont offered me an interim role. Time to heal, to figure out what comes next. Through the window, I saw my mother hauling suitcases, bound for exile. Have you spoken to her? Once, to tell her I filed for divorce. The word hung between us like thunder. Divorce unthinkable in our family, but it was the only truth left. A knock at the door. My father returned with Judge Reed. The man looked as though life had carved years into his face in days. His apology was simple, unpolished. For his son, for me, for everything. You're not responsible for his choices, I told him. His laugh was bitter. I raised him to think he was untouchable. Maybe I made him what he became. No, I said. You raised a son. He chose the man he became. He nodded slowly, eyes hollow with regret. And in that moment, I realized we were all standing in the ruins of choices, but at least I had chosen myself. He studied me for a long while, eyes heavy with something between guilt and awe. You're remarkable, you know that? Most people would have been crushed by this. But you're standing here, offering wisdom to a foolish old man. I learned from the best, I said softly, glancing at my father. When Judge Reed left, silence filled the study again. My father and I worked side by side, packing the last of his books as the golden light of sunset painted the walls in warm, melancholy hues. At last, he sealed the final box and looked around at the room that had been his sanctuary for decades. Any regrets? I asked, about the divorce, about leaving. His pause lingered, heavy with memory. No, about raising a daughter brave enough to choose truth over comfort? Never. 6 months later, I stood in the garden behind my apartment in Alexandria, spring unfurling its soft colors after a brutal winter. Cherry blossoms scattered like pink confetti, the air rich with grass and possibility. My phone rang my father's weekly call. How's Vermont? I asked, beautiful, peaceful, no politics, no drama. Just faith and people who still believe in it. And are you happy? I'm getting there. What about you? How's the job? 3 months earlier, I'd accepted a senior editor role at a prestigious publishing house in New York. The salary was generous, the work demanding, and best of all, it was hundreds of miles away from the ruins of my old life. I love it. I told him honestly, the city, the work, the freedom. Here, I'm just Celeste, not the woman from that wedding video. Good. You deserve a new beginning. The video had eventually lost its viral edge, replaced by fresher scandals. But for weeks I'd been the internet's reluctant heroine, praised for choosing dignity over silence. The flood of messages I'd received from women across the world, women who'd endured betrayal, who'd stayed quiet for too long, had been overwhelming, but also healing. They thanked me for showing them that survival wasn't enough. That choosing yourself was not selfish, but necessary. Have you heard from her? My father asked, as he always did. No. And I hadn't. Diana tried through others, my aunt, old friends, even a former boss, but I'd set my boundary. Some betrayals carve wounds too deep for easy forgiveness. Maybe one day I'd speak to her again, but not now. And Nathaniel? His attorney had reached out. Therapy, apologies, the faint promise of change. I laughed when I heard, though, without the bitterness that once defined me. My response had been simple. The best amends he could offer was to leave me in peace. That afternoon, I sat in my garden with a manuscript about a woman who discovered her husband's decades-long affair and chose to rebuild anyway. I saw myself in her story, but instead of pain, I found kinship in her resilience. The doorbell broke my focus. A delivery man stood there holding a bouquet of wildflowers, the kind I'd wanted for my wedding before my mother insisted on roses. The card read, "For choosing yourself, from someone who understands, a friend." Number, name, no return address, but none was needed. Over the months, I have found a quiet sisterhood of survivors, women who had walked away, who had spoken truth, who had chosen themselves despite the cost. We looked out for one another. I set the flowers on my kitchen table, their natural beauty glowing brighter than any roses could. Then I returned to my garden, my manuscript, and the life I was slowly and deliberately creating. 1 year later, I stood behind a podium at the National Women's Literature Conference, my nameplate glinting under the ballroom lights. Celeste Darren, keynote speaker. A year ago, I began, my voice echoing through the grand hall. I stood at an altar before 200 people and made a choice no one expected me to make. Not the easy choice, but true one. The one that honored who I am. Faces in the audience leaned forward, eyes shining, nodding. My story had traveled far not for its scandal, but for its truth. We're taught from childhood that keeping peace matters more than keeping our dignity, that being liked is more valuable than being honest, that other people's comfort is worth more than our own. But here's what I've learned. When you choose truth over comfort, when you choose yourself over those who chose to betray you, you don't just change your life. You give permission to everyone watching to do the same. The applause was thunderous, a tide of shared relief and recognition. Afterward, dozens of women approached, each with her own story of betrayal, of silence broken, of freedom chosen. That night, alone in my hotel room, I scrolled through messages online. They all echoed the same refrain. Thank you for showing us it was possible. Thank you for refusing to be silent. My phone buzzed with a message from my father. Watched your speech online. Mom would be proud. I froze, staring at the words. He meant my grandmother, the woman whose veil I had worn on that shattered wedding day, who taught me that grace and strength could exist together, that sometimes love meant refusing to enable cruelty. Yet I wondered if he also meant Diana. If somewhere in Baltimore, my mother had watched me speak and felt something like pride woven through her regret. I would never know. and I was finally at peace with that dot outside. New York shimmered like scattered diamonds against velvet night. Millions of people out there were making choices, some cowardly, some brave, some that would change everything. I raised my glass in a silent toast, not to happily ever afters, but to those who chose freedom when silence would be easier. To those who left beautiful prisons disguised as love. Sometimes the greatest revenge is not ruin, but release. Sometimes the truest love story is the one you write with yourself. And sometimes the only happily ever after worth having is the one you build on your own uncheckable truth.